One of the things that we did around about 12 months ago was to have a series of workshops inside different parts of Vodafone and say, so out of all this, where are the areas that mobile can play a role? And then we went back to the different sectors and say, so what are your expectations of the role that mobile's going to play in your spaces? So I've just picked off 4 or 5. This is what the outside world is saying about how they are expecting mobile to help them. A bit about identity. So many people are just assuming that your mobile is a surrogate for who you are. You know, you go to, whether it's Germany or Japan, where you get charged when your mobile gets on and off the train, and the assumption that because your mobile's on the train, you're on the train. Very early signals, but lots of people are very much expecting that your SIM card is you, and therefore it provides access to a whole load of things off the back of it. So as a general thing, everybody's assuming that this is going to happen, and that the one thing that's always on you is your SIM card. Almost to a point of, it's almost like embedded on you type attitudes, but the outside world just expects this to happen, and therefore it has, and they're planning lots of interesting things around that. And the money thing, obviously M-Pesa gets everybody excited, but just the whole potential about where that's going to go is there. Some people blind to the fact that it will never become 100%. You know, there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, well, digital money, electronic cash, whatever you want to call it, 100% of society. Absolutely no way. We had a big pushback to say, well, you know, 15% of the UK economy is black, 40% of the Italian, 65% of the Greek economy is black. That will never go into the official taxation system, and therefore it'll never go onto a mobile platform because people can see it. So there's a lot of sort of get real, it's never going to be 100%. What is interesting is how the banks are reacting to the mobile as a platform for virtual currencies. So things like Facebook, what Facebook are trying to do with Facebook credits, but the idea of a global virtual currency that people buy and sell stuff online through, earn money via, has got the banks really worried, because A, it takes all the small transactions that they make their 1% and 2% on all the time. B, it's outside currency exchanges, because a Facebook credit is a Facebook credit everywhere in the world. And C, it's completely outside the taxation system. So if 5% of the world, let's say in 20 years' time, is using virtual currencies to do stuff, probably enabled via the mobile, that's 5% of the world's GDP that's now outside the taxation system and is independent of currency. When you start to talk to people who are trying to raise money like governments, and start to talk to people like banks who are trying to make money out of every transaction, they get really worried about the power that this could have as a disruption. And clearly, the implicit expectation is it's all based on mobile platforms. So, and some people push back and say, oh, we'll be able to tax it, we'll be able to come up with a regulation. How do you regulate an international bartering mechanism that has no implicit value? It's a big challenge for lawmakers, particularly when the data is probably hosted in some server in some tax-free zone somewhere. So it starts to get people quite excited. So lots of expectation here, few of them not quite in reality, but interesting as to which ones could really play out. Healthcare, clearly huge. We were talking earlier around the whole M-Health opportunity. I don't need to tell you about the sort of stuff that you can do. The interesting thing when you start to talk to some of the government people who are looking at financing this is the challenge that largely today we fund sick care, not healthcare. All the money generally goes on the last 2 years of life. 80% of the world's healthcare budgets goes on keeping people alive for a little bit longer. You know, it's $150,000 for 3 months of cancer treatment. The benefits that preventative healthcare, particularly mobile-enabled stuff, can do to keep people out of the sick care system and keep them healthy is huge. The challenge is the business models aren't yet fully in place. You know, McKinsey talk about a 50 billion a year mobile health opportunity. But when you push back, you say, yeah, but actually, how's that going to work when everything, pretty much everything at the moment, is focused on curing people when they get ill, not on keeping them healthy before they get ill. And until we can come up with an alternative business model for the healthcare system, a lot of the great stuff that we can do probably won't happen as quickly as we expect it to do, because the money flows aren't necessarily going to be there everywhere. They may well be there in Africa and India, way ahead of the more regulated parts of the world where people tend to think of this having a big opportunity. And then the last couple, it's interesting, because everybody sees that every car has now got will have a SIM card in it by 2015, and every traffic light will be a node in the network, people have jumped to, it's just going to be like Minority Report, only without the floating girls in the swimming pool. We're going to be able to drive around with cars without any steering, total recall, and all that stuff is going to be a reality because it's all going to happen. You go, oh, hold on. Not so quick. Where's it actually going to be by 2020? The bits that they're quite confident about is we won't all be having autonomous vehicles and intelligent highways, but we will have more assisted driving. So if you talk to Volvo, they talk about nobody ever being involved in a crash in a Volvo. So if the car's likely to enter a dangerous situation, it'll take over from you. Same happening BMW, etc. If you talk to the truck companies, they're really keen on the idea of truck platoons. So effectively 10 trucks all in a row going along the motorway, but only one driver in the front one. And then everything electronically coupled via mobile data to the one behind. So huge efficiencies in terms of those trucks can go really close together, one driver, etc. And they are built, the Americans are starting to segregate lanes to do this in for the big interstate highways and say, okay, that's a truck-only lane and the truck platoon's going down it. The more interesting stuff is actually around inside urban environments, where people are looking at totally autonomous delivery trucks, particularly electric trucks, are likely to start coming in. You know, you've got examples like the at Heathrow Airport, Terminal 5, I don't know whether you've seen the totally unmanned things that go from Terminal 5 to the car park. People are expecting those to go off tracks and to use mobile as a navigation. So lots and lots of expectation, massive amounts of investment going in. Big problem. All this assumes that we've got data on everybody on every piece of road. And obviously, it only works if we've got 100% data. If we've got 90% of the vehicles on the road on the system and the other 10% aren't, it's not even worth going down that route. So the big challenge that people push back on with this is how we're going to get people to share all that data and who we're going to trust to own the data. And as people flip from one network to another, to a local Wi-Fi, WiMAX system, back onto Vodafone, and then onto Telefonica, how's that handover to 120 miles an hour going to actually be guaranteed? So all the car companies are spending lots of money expecting that you'll put the infrastructure in place that'll make this work. But there's a bit of a pushback as to exactly how quickly that'll come up, and that issue about the sharing of the data. And then lastly, I mentioned IBM's view about 1 trillion sensors by 2015. This whole, as you know, the whole M2M space, huge expectations about the efficiency that can be gained inside the infrastructure, inside factories, inside pretty much everything from effectively everything becoming a node in the network. Now, whether everything's a SIM card or whether they're just passive RFID tags or whatever, the assumption is that this is happening. The data, the ability to process the data and store the data is there. The big challenge is the interconnectivity of all the machines and and that's all going to flow seamlessly. So lots of people like Siemens and co investing enormously in intelligent cities based on an assumption that probably the mobile networks are going to be the way that all the data is moved around. So if you bring all that back and say, well, what's this mean? And you say, we've been out, we've talked to thousands of different people, we've talked to every continent, we've talked to the mayors of Shanghai and the head of technology at Google and school children in Mumbai, etc. And we've filtered it all through to say, well, what's related to mobile. The two big things that came to the top out of all this was, one, about the network. The expectations that the rest of society seems to have on how efficiently mobile networks will instantaneously give access to the data to enable all this to happen. 24/7, 100% quality. It may not be impossible for 2020, but it seems to be that it's slightly more than we can do right now, particularly when you start to think about some of the things around the high-speed movement of vehicles, etc. So there is this huge expectation that the networks can support all this, that some people, when we then brought it back into the mobile industry, said, well, we will be ready, but we're not ready yet to deal with some of the expectations. And then the other one going back to the identity issue, lots of people expecting something really big to go wrong with personal data sometime in the next few years. We had a workshop in Washington with the various people in the American government involved, and somebody there came up with the phrase, we think there's going to be a privacy Chernobyl. We don't know what it is, and what's happening with PlayStation and Facebook isn't even a privacy 3 Mile Island. Something really, really big is going to go wrong with personal data, probably in the healthcare space, because you've got relatively important information being given quite low levels of security. There's an expectation that people are pushing at the edges of consumer privacy too much, that something's going to give, and there could be a backlash. So the challenge, flipping it around, is how do you proactively prevent that happening? How do we get in place the right agreements, the right protocols around customer data, particularly at an individual, not necessarily an aggregated level, so that that problem doesn't happen? And when you talk to people and say, well, who's responsible for this? They all just turn around and say, oh, well, that'll be the mobile phone networks then, because the data's flowing through their networks. So there's a huge expectation, again, that it's down to the collective mobile world to solve this problem before the problem actually starts to be a big barrier. And then just wrapping all that up is sort of a big step back, I suppose. And previous to this, I'd never really sort of interacted much with the mobile world, but I spent most of my time in other sectors. It seems to be that if the last 20 years the mobile sector has grown because you've been able to control what you're doing, and you've been able to say, we want to do this, and we're going to do this, and we'll roll out 3G and 4G, and we're going to do all this. The outside world has got so many expectations on what you're going to do over the next 10 years that it's probably going to be 50% doing stuff within your space, but the other 50% is going to be helping everybody else deliver their expectations. So as I said, some of that may be totally comfortable and totally familiar. Some of it you may disagree with violently, but that's a view of how, when we went around, talked to all these people, brought it all together, and then said, so what are they saying about mobile? At a headline level, in 40 odd minutes, that's sort of what they're saying.